Have you ever heard a story that proves love can cross social classes, break down pride, and even transform the heart of a millionaire? Then get ready, because what you're about to hear isn't a fairy tale, it's a life lesson. The journey of Angela Brown, a humble cleaning lady who saved the son of one of Miami's most powerful men, will make you rethink everything you believe about destiny, faith, and the true worth of a person. But before we dive into this story, one that moves even the hardest hearts, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because here we tell real stories that inspire and transform. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I want to see how far this message travels, because today you'll understand why love, courage, and faith are the only riches time can never take away. The Hale mansion shimmered like a mirror under the Miami sun. Marble everywhere, gardens perfectly aligned, luxury cars parading at the entrance. It was in this setting that Angela Brown, a quiet, sharp-eyed cleaning lady, began her new job. To many, cleaning the home of a millionaire was a mark of prestige. To her, it was simply another honest way to move forward, carrying with her the serenity of someone who had already known real simplicity. The contrast between the brightness of the house and the silence inside was almost unsettling. Each room felt like a stage where no one performed anymore. Angela noticed details that others would easily overlook: the dusty portrait on the wall, the absence of a child's laughter, the cold scent of expensive perfume. Everything there exuded perfection but lacked soul. That's when she saw the boy, Ben Hale, watching her from afar, curious, as if trying to understand how someone could smile while cleaning floors. Their connection happened effortlessly. Ben offered to help, though his little hands clumsily held the cloth. Angela smiled, and in that small gesture a quiet bond was born. The boy carried a kind of loneliness that didn't match the life of an heir. While the other employees rushed by, she could see that what this child needed wasn't more toys, it was attention. As she cleaned, the cleaning lady noticed something that unsettled her. Ben coughed, a dry, persistent sound carrying something more than mere discomfort. Angela watched from a distance, waiting for someone else to notice. But no one did. In the world of millionaires, problems were treated like dust, swept under the rug. That cough lingered in Angela's thoughts. Her quiet maternal instinct whispered that something was wrong. It was like a faint echo that wouldn't fade. Though she didn't want to overstep her bounds, she remained alert, observing the boy's steps through the wide windows and spotless hallways. Each sound seemed like a disguised call for help. Time moved slowly that first day. Angela carried out every task with the care of someone who understands that small actions build great destinies. The shine of the floor reflected not only the light from the windows, but also the care and affection she poured into everything she did. That dedication, unnoticed by others, would soon begin to change the balance of that luxurious home. Yet beneath the golden polish, something invisible stirred. The mansion, so perfect on the outside, hid secrets in every polished corner. Angela could feel the distant presence of Richard Hale, the billionaire owner of it all. He walked by in haste, always on the phone, as if time were a treasure more valuable than affection. Between him and his son stretched an emptiness that no amount of money could fill. By late afternoon, sunlight streamed through the colored glass, painting golden reflections on the walls. Angela watched the boy playing alone and realized how small childhood joy seemed within so much empty space. The contrast between luxury and longing, power and tenderness was striking. Silence, at times, screamed louder than any word, and it was within that silence that the first omen took shape. Ben's cough echoed again, stronger, deeper. Angela froze for a moment and looked up. Something about that sound wasn't normal. She didn't know it yet, but that simple act of paying attention, of hearing what no one else heard, would be the beginning of a story that would change everything. Angela arrived early the next morning, as she always did. On her face was the serenity of someone who believes that well-done work is a form of prayer. Yet she sensed cold glances as she passed, muffled whispers between the servants, a tension that hadn't been there before. Still, she stayed focused, cleaning every corner with the same dedication. The millionaire's mansion felt even quieter that day, as if it were hiding a secret no one dared to mention. Worried, Angela sought out the head housekeeper, Mrs. Whitmore, and mentioned Ben's persistent cough. "He doesn't seem well," she said softly. The answer came sharp. "That's none of your business." The woman's tone was icy, but it didn't silence the instinct stirring inside her. The cleaning lady knew that when a child's well-being is at stake, turning away isn't an option. Meanwhile, Richard Hale, the millionaire, was locked in meetings behind closed doors. His voice echoed distantly, speaking of contracts and investments, unaware of his own son's presence. Isabella, his glamorous fiancée, glided down the stairs as if walking a runway, filling the air with perfume and indifference. To her, Ben was nothing more than a prop in the perfect family image she flaunted online. Angela watched in silence. The boy coughed again and no one reacted. It was as if her concern were invisible, as if compassion had no place in that world of appearances. The weight of helplessness pressed on her chest, but her faith whispered that truth always finds its way to be heard, even when the world tries to silence it. One rainy evening, as she gathered linens from the guest room, Angela heard a muffled voice from the hallway. It was Isabella on the phone, speaking quickly, angrily. "He'll fall sick soon. It's only a matter of time." The words echoed in Angela's mind like a haunting refrain. The tone wasn't worried, it was certain. Angela's heart raced. Everything suddenly began to make a cruel kind of sense. Was it coincidence? Or was she witnessing something far darker than she imagined? Fear came hand in hand with courage. The kind of courage born from loss. The kind that refuses to let history repeat itself. Without evidence, she knew she had to watch, to listen, to understand. Ben's fate might depend on it. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She mopped the corridors, fixed the curtains, changed the sheets. Isabella strutted around the house wearing her practiced smile, while Richard barely noticed the tension in the air. The cleaning lady stayed vigilant, her eyes quietly recording everything. Sometimes power hides in small gestures. A swapped glass of water, an open window at the right moment, a gaze that sees without being seen. Angela felt the weight of living between two worlds. On one side, the brilliance of the millionaires. On the other, the silent dignity of simple people. She was invisible, yet she saw everything, and perhaps that was what made her dangerous to those with something to hide. In mansions like this, power fears a pure gaze, because a pure gaze sees what gold cannot cover. As the night wind swept through the corridors and the rain returned, Angela closed her eyes for a moment. There was a heavy premonition in the air, almost tangible, of something terrible approaching. She didn't yet know what to do, but she was already too deep to turn back. Deep down, what guided her was not fear. It was a quiet promise waiting to awaken. Night fell over Miami, and the Hale mansion glowed beneath the cold lights streaming through its glass walls. Angela Brown, alone in the service area, couldn't stop thinking about Ben. The sound of the boy's cough echoed in her mind like a relentless whisper. As she washed the rags, the cleaning lady felt her heart tighten. There was something about that child that stirred memories she had buried deep within her soul. In silence, Angela looked at the small photograph of her late son. His smiling face lived in her memory, mingled with the scent of disinfectant and soap. The pain had never left. She had only learned to live with it. And now, in Ben's fragile figure, her maternal instinct reawakened, reviving a promise once made at a humble grave. As long as I live, no child near me will suffer alone. The next day, she began to act subtly. She watched Ben from afar, paying attention to the glasses, the food, the medicine the housekeeper gave him. Everything she did was careful, deliberate. The cleaning lady knew that in a millionaire's house, even the truth had to disguise itself. Small gestures became her way of protecting him. Switching a glass of water, brewing a herbal tea, opening the windows to let fresh air in. Little by little, the boy began to smile again. Angela noticed the color returning to his cheeks, and that alone renewed her strength. The bond between them grew naturally, as if fate had tied their souls long before. Ben started seeking her out each morning, sometimes for help with toys, other times just to hear a story. The mansion, once cold and lifeless, began to sound like a home again. Even so, worry never left Angela's heart. The fear of losing another child made her pray each night. In her thoughts, she asked for strength and clarity. She knew that within those golden walls, compassion was the only shield against darkness. What she didn't know was that the battle ahead would test her in ways she had never imagined. One sunny morning, while tidying Ben's room, Angela noticed something strange. The boy looked pale, his lips dry, his breathing weak. She called his name, but there was no answer. The toy slipped from his hand and his small body collapsed onto the carpet. Panic struck like lightning. Time froze. Only the pounding of her heart filled the air, pleading for a miracle. Angela rushed to the phone, calling for help through trembling sobs. She carried the boy in her arms to the gate, screaming for someone to come. The contrast was brutal. A humble cleaning lady, desperate, holding the heir to an empire. Workers ran, sirens wailed, and the scene became a blur of movement, fear, and tears. In that moment, nothing else mattered. When the ambulance drove away, the mansion's marble floors felt colder than ever. Angela stood motionless, her hands shaking, her uniform stained with tears. She felt the weight of destiny pressing on her shoulders, as if the past had returned to test her resolve. Deep inside, she repeated her silent vow, to protect, to care, to fight, even if no one believed her. And as the vehicle disappeared down the road, Angela knew that this was the turning point. The story, once quiet, had found its voice. Little did she know that within hours, she would be accused of the very thing she had tried to prevent. Love, when misunderstood, is always the first to be judged. The sound of sirens still echoed in Angela Brown's ears when she arrived at the hospital. Her heart pounded erratically and her hands were trembling. Ben lay unconscious, surrounded by doctors and machines. The cleaning lady stood at a distance, unable to hold back her tears. Every second felt like an eternity, and the weight of uncertainty pressed against her chest like a stone. Word spread quickly back at the mansion. Isabella arrived at the hospital, her face pale and her eyes glistening with false sorrow. The perfect disguise. She approached Richard Hale, the millionaire, and whispered in a trembling voice, "It was her, the cleaning lady." The word sliced through the air like a blade. In an instant, all eyes turned toward Angela, filled with judgment and suspicion. Richard, consumed by rage and fear, believed what he heard. The shock of seeing his son in that hospital bed blinded him to reason. He stormed toward Angela and shouted, "Get out! Now!" The words hit harder than any blow. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. The truth drowned beneath the hum of medical machines. Angela stepped back, her eyes glistening, her pride keeping her from collapsing. As she turned to leave, she looked at the doctor, Dr. Daniel Lewis, and said softly, "Check the food. I think he's being poisoned." Her voice trembled, but her conviction was firm. The doctor, startled, nodded silently, scribbling a note before rushing back inside. Back at the mansion, silence reigned. The Golden House felt emptier than ever. The staff whispered down the corridors, and Angela's name passed from mouth to mouth in tones of suspicion. The cleaning lady had become the perfect scapegoat, humble, powerless, easy to blame. And in the world of millionaires, guilt often falls on those who can't afford to defend themselves. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, something began to shift. The doctor, guided by intuition, decided to follow Angela's warning. He ordered new tests and reviewed the previous ones. Hours dragged by until the unthinkable was revealed. Traces of toxins were found in Ben's system. The boy wasn't sick. He was being poisoned. The news struck like lightning. Richard fell silent, unable to process it. The words of the cleaning lady he had thrown out echoed painfully in his mind. Regret crept in, quiet, heavy, inescapable. For the first time, the millionaire began to understand that he might have condemned the wrong person. Meanwhile, Angela wandered the streets of Miami aimlessly, her uniform still stained with tears. The night wind carried the scent of salt from the sea and memories of the boy she had sworn to protect. Even carrying the weight of injustice, she kept her head high. She knew the truth always finds its way, even when the world refuses to listen. And somewhere between guilt and silence, the next chapter of this story was already unfolding. Because when truth begins to rise, no lie can stand for long, and what came next would reveal the real poison, the kind not found in food, but in human hearts. The following hours were torment for Richard Hale. The billionaire, used to controlling everything and everyone, now faced pure helplessness. The doctor entered the room with a grave expression, holding an envelope of test results. When he revealed that Ben had been poisoned, silence swallowed the air. For a moment, the world seemed to collapse around him, and the name Angela Brown echoed in his mind like a painful reminder. The memories came rushing back. The cleaning lady's desperate expression, her plea to check the food, her trembling voice begging to be heard, everything he had dismissed now made sense. Richard felt a knot tighten in his throat, the weight of regret pushing pride aside. For the first time in years, the millionaire realized he had judged through fear, not through truth. Meanwhile, the police began their investigation. Isabella tried to hide her nerves, but her hands trembled slightly. With every question from the detective, her confidence drained away like spilled wine. Richard watched her quietly, his gaze sharp, trying to connect the pieces. Deep down, he began to sense that the real danger was closer than he'd ever imagined. Across town, Angela prayed. Kneeling in the small kitchen of her modest apartment, eyes closed and hands clasped, she asked only that Ben would live. She wanted no justice, no recognition, just life. That was who the cleaning lady had always been, guided by love even when the world turned its back on her. Faith was all she had left, and she held on to it like the last rope before the fall. Back at the mansion, Richard couldn't sleep. He paced through the golden corridors, once symbols of pride, now hollow and heavy with guilt. Every step echoed like a reminder of his failures. The walls, once adorned with priceless art, seemed to watch him with judgment. The man who had everything, wealth, fame, power, now felt small before the strength of a woman he had dismissed. At dawn, the phone rang. It was Dr. Lewis. His voice was firm but cautious. "Mr. Hale, the test confirmed it. Ben was poisoned. Mrs. Brown was right." Richard closed his eyes, breathing deeply. The words cut through him. Not only because of the discovery, but because of the shame that followed. He had turned away the one person who had tried to save what he loved most. When he saw Isabella that morning, something had shifted in his gaze. Her gestures, once alluring, now seemed rehearsed. Her answers came too quickly. The billionaire, for the first time, began to see without illusion. He noticed the details: suspicious bank transfers, secret phone calls, conversations that ended when he entered the room. Doubt began to take shape, and with it, a thirst for truth. Angela, unaware of any of it, lit a candle and whispered a prayer of gratitude that Ben was alive. Each flicker of flame felt like hope reborn. She didn't know that, at that very moment, Richard was beginning to see her for who she truly was. Not an invisible cleaning lady, but a woman of courage and compassion. And as the sun rose over Miami, two fates that once seemed worlds apart began to intertwine again, bound by truth. The poison was leaving the boy's body, and the man's conscience. Yet the serpent still slithered within that house, wearing the mask of innocence, and Richard was about to learn just how far ambition would go to destroy love. The days that followed were mirrors of silence. Angela Brown, now far from the Hale mansion, began to rebuild what was left of her life. She found a simple job as a stock clerk at a local supermarket. Among shelves and stacked boxes, she rediscovered the quiet dignity that had never left her, even when the world tried to stain her name. Meanwhile, Richard Hale lived the opposite reality. The billionaire, once confident and untouchable, was now a man divided between guilt and duty. The evidence against Isabella quietly grew. Suspicious bank transfers, erased phone calls, nervous gestures that betrayed her calm facade. What once seemed paranoia now sounded like late-blooming clarity. One rainy night, Richard opened his laptop and began searching through Isabella's financial records. The blue light from the screen reflected in his tired eyes, each discovery hitting like a blow to the heart. Between statements and hidden messages, a pattern emerged. Isabella had been transferring money to unknown accounts. The poison was not only in the food, it lived in the deceit wrapped in love. Meanwhile, at the supermarket, Angela moved gracefully down the aisles with her restocking cart. She smiled at customers, helped the elderly reach high shelves, and taught younger coworkers with quiet patience. Even after everything, she continued to bring light where life insisted on darkness. The cleaning lady had lost her job, but not her purpose. One afternoon, a particular customer appeared. Richard entered the store wearing simple clothes, trying to hide his shame. When he saw her arranging products on the shelves, his heart raced. Angela looked up and recognized him immediately, but stayed calm. She pretended not to notice him, perhaps because forgiveness, to be genuine, must first be felt in silence. Richard watched her from a distance. The contrast was painful. The woman he had expelled now stood there, surrounded by boxes and fluorescent light, working with the same quiet dignity as always. And he, the man of power, was the one who felt small. In that moment, the millionaire understood something no fortune could ever teach, that true worth lies in what remains when everything else is taken away. Across the city, Isabella was losing control. Her lies were growing harder to sustain, and Richard's suspicious gaze made her falter. The mansion was no longer a home, but a minefield of secrets ready to explode. The luxury was beginning to crumble, not in its walls, but in the truths buried within them. Angela, unaware, had already been forgiven in Richard's heart. But forgiveness alone wasn't enough. He needed to earn it. So he began visiting the supermarket every day, pretending to shop for things he didn't need just to see her. Pride still kept him silent, but his eyes spoke what his voice could not. And so, between shelves and unspoken regrets, a new beginning quietly took shape. The truth, once buried beneath vanity and gold, was finally finding its way to the surface. But forgiveness, that would be the next step, and perhaps the hardest of all. Richard Hale returned to the supermarket every single day. Sometimes he bought just a bottle of water. Other times he pretended to browse items he would never need. But deep down he wasn't looking for groceries, and he was looking for courage. With each visit, the millionaire carried the weight of guilt and the fear of facing the woman who, despite all the pain, seemed to possess a peace greater than all his wealth. Angela Brown noticed him from afar. It was impossible not to. A man like that stood out among discount aisles and humming fluorescent lights. Still, she pretended not to see him. Not out of pride, but because forgiveness sometimes needs time to ripen, and she had learned through years of hardship that the right words only bloom when the heart no longer bleeds. One quiet afternoon, Richard finally found the strength to speak. He approached Angela, who was stacking cereal boxes, and stood silently for a moment. The noise of carts and customers seemed to fade. "Angela, I came to apologize." The words trembled, heavy with remorse. She stopped what she was doing, looked at him calmly, and said only, "It's done, Mr. Hale. The boy is well, that's what matters." But the millionaire persisted. He explained that he had discovered everything. The poison, Isabella's deceit, his unforgivable mistake in accusing her. He confessed that Ben called out her name in his sleep, asking for her every night. The tears in his voice softened him, stripping away the arrogance that once defined him. Angela listened in silence, her heart torn between pain and compassion. He was no longer the cold man of before, just a father humbled by love and regret. "There's no money that could repay what you've done," he continued. "I'm not here as a rich man. I'm here as a father who failed." Angela lowered her eyes, took a deep breath, and replied softly, "What I did was for Ben, not for you. But maybe we all deserve a second chance." The words were simple, but they carried the quiet power of grace. Short, sincere, and healing. In the days that followed, Richard kept coming back. He didn't say much. Sometimes he just watched her work. He brought small gestures, flowers, coffee, a kind word. Slowly, the tension between them began to melt away, replaced by something deeper: respect. He was no longer the master, and she was no longer just the cleaning lady. They were two souls learning to walk again side by side, unburdened by the past. Eventually, Angela agreed to visit Ben at the mansion, just until he fully recovered. The moment she arrived, the boy ran into her arms, his smile bright and pure. "Mama Angela!" he shouted, hugging her tightly. The house, once filled with emptiness, came alive again. For a moment, the marble, the chandeliers, and the gold lost their shine. Only love and gratitude remained. Yet something unsettled her. A faint unease whispered through the halls. The shadows of old pain still lingered in that house. Angela sensed it. The mansion, though quieter now, still hid secrets. She didn't know it yet, but not all the ghosts had left. Because forgiveness heals, but it also brings light. And when light enters, everything hidden begins to surface, even the darkness that refuses to die. Angela Brown's return to the Hale mansion was quiet, almost ceremonial. The iron gates opened slowly, as if even the wind hesitated to breathe at that moment. The place looked the same, golden, immaculate, gleaming. But something had changed. Maybe it was the air, maybe it was the conscience of those inside. The millionaire Richard Hale waited by the door, humble-eyed, no longer the man who once threw her out in anger. Angela walked through the grand hall with calm, measured steps. The sound of her low heels echoed across the marble floor as memories tried to seep through the cracks in the walls. The house, once a palace in her eyes, now felt hollow. The luxury no longer intimidated her. True strength, she knew, was found in serving again, this time without fear. When Ben saw her, he ran into her arms, and their embrace filled the air with long-lost warmth. The boy's laughter broke the silence that had haunted the house. Angela smiled, gently fixing his hair, whispering, "Everything's all right now." Richard watched from a distance, and on his face there was something new. Not admiration born of guilt, but genuine respect. For the first time, he saw the humanity he had ignored for so long. But not everyone shared that light. Isabella Moore, Richard's elegant fiancée, still lived in the mansion, her presence lingering like a shadow. From afar, she watched Angela with a smile too polished to be sincere, her eyes sharp and calculating. To her, the cleaning lady's return was a silent threat, proof that neither money nor appearances could bury the truth forever. Days passed in fragile balance. Angela cared for Ben with her usual tenderness, filling the mansion with laughter and warmth. Isabella, meanwhile, wore her false kindness like expensive perfume, beautiful but suffocating. When Richard wasn't around, her mask slipped. The house lived between two energies, Angela's quiet peace and Isabella's hidden malice. Richard, more observant than ever, began to notice the clipped tone of Isabella's voice, her nervous excuses, the way her eyes darted when questioned. It was like watching a play whose curtains were beginning to tear. Then he'd look toward Angela, humming softly as she cleaned Ben's room, and the contrast struck him. The pure calm of a humble woman against the glittering emptiness of one consumed by greed. One sunny morning, while tidying the master bedroom, Angela noticed something unusual. Between Isabella's jewels tucked away in a velvet box were small glass vials filled with a pale yellow liquid. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. She knew instantly what it was. The poison had a face, a scent, and a name. What came next would demand more courage than ever before. Angela drew in a long breath, looked out the window, and understood. Truth, though painful, had to be revealed. Fate had once again placed her in the eye of the storm, but this time she wasn't alone. There was a boy who believed in her. There was a man ready to listen, and so under the same roof that once rejected her, Angela prepared to free that house from deceit. Evil still smiled in its halls, draped in silk and gold, but justice was already on its way, silent, steady, and finally armed with a name, evidence, and the courage to prevail. Dawn brought a strange silence to the Hale mansion. The wind slipped through the silk curtains as if carrying a warning. Angela Brown walked quietly down the halls, her heart pounding in her chest. In her hands she held the small glass vials she had found among Isabella's jewels. She knew that each drop inside told a story, and none of them were about love. Richard Hale received her in his office, a wide room with tall windows and dark wooden furniture. He looked weary, his gaze lost among piles of papers. When Angela entered, he straightened in his chair, sensing that something important was about to unfold. She placed the vials on the desk, and the faint sound of glass against wood broke the silence like a sentence being delivered. They were in her things, Angela said firmly without hesitation. For a moment, Richard didn't react. He simply stared at the yellowish liquid, and the past came flooding back with full force, doubt, guilt, fear, swirling together like a storm. "Is this what I think it is?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Angela simply nodded. That was enough. In that instant, the millionaire rose abruptly, his face frozen in shock. He rushed through the golden corridors toward Isabella's room, where she stood in front of the mirror. Her reflection showed a flawless woman, perfect makeup, hair smooth, smile rehearsed. But behind the reflection, fear was already beginning to crack the surface. "Richard, what's wrong?" she asked, trying to keep her tone sweet. He threw the vials onto the vanity. "Explain this." The words hit like thunder. Isabella stepped back, eyes wide, body tense. She tried to deny it, but her voice betrayed her. Within seconds, the veneer of elegance began to shatter. Her once charming gaze turned sharp and desperate. "You wouldn't understand." "It was for us," she screamed, caught between fake tears and real panic. The argument quickly turned into a confession. Under pressure, Isabella broke down. She revealed her plan, to poison Ben slowly, cash in on the life insurance, and disappear with the money. The mask had finally fallen. Richard staggered back, stunned, as the illusion of the perfect woman dissolved before his eyes, leaving only the raw, ugly truth behind. Angela, standing at the doorway, remained still. There was sadness in her expression, yes, but also a strange sense of justice. It was as if the universe had quietly balanced its scales. The distant sound of sirens began to fill the air. Within minutes, Detective Harris entered the mansion, followed by 2 officers. The handcuffs glimmered in the golden morning light. Isabella fought, pleaded, cried. But it was too late. The image of the flawless socialite crumbled into screams and tears. As she was taken away, she cast Angela one last hateful look, silent, powerless fury. Angela didn't flinch. She stood tall, calm, a witness to truth, not vengeance. Richard watched, tears welling in his eyes, his soul stripped bare. When the police car finally drove off, silence settled over the mansion. The breeze drifted through the open windows, cleansing the air of everything rotten. Richard turned to Angela, and for the first time his eyes said what his lips couldn't: gratitude. Between them, there were no longer roles of master and cleaning lady, only 2 souls, healed by pain and forgiveness, and yet, something new was being born, something no tragedy and no fortune could ever buy. The Hale mansion was never the same again. The silence that once sounded like arrogance now felt like peace. The walls, once cold, began to echo something new. Laughter, footsteps, life. Angela Brown walked through the halls with ease, no longer burdened by the weight of invisibility. The millionaire Richard Hale, in turn, seemed like a different man, more human, more present, almost simple amidst his luxury. Ben grew up happy, running through the gardens with the sparkle of a boy who had rediscovered love. Angela watched him tenderly, as if witnessing the healing of an old wound. She organized the house, tended to the flowers, and sang softly, filling the air with calm. The laughter of Ben and the hum of Angela's song became the new soundtrack of the mansion. From a distance, Richard watched their routine with quiet gratitude. The presence of the cleaning lady had done what money never could: give the house a soul. He began to have lunch with his son, laugh at small things, and even turn off his phone for hours. What once seemed impossible had become sacred. It was as though life itself had finally begun to breathe again within those golden walls. Angela, however, remained true to herself. She never let comfort spoil her simplicity. She still woke up early, still set the table by hand, still whispered a prayer before sleeping. Her room remained modest, few belongings but full of meaning. There, between white sheets and a photo of the son she lost, she found the strength to keep going. One afternoon, while cleaning the office, Angela came across an old box on the bookshelf. Inside was a faded photograph, an image of a baby in the arms of a woman wearing a white nurse's uniform. Turning it over, she read the date and the name of the hospital, the same one where Ben had been born. Her heart raced. She recognized the place, and herself. In that picture, she was younger, wearing her nursing uniform. And the baby in her arms, and that curious look, that same innocent smile, was Ben. Angela sat down, her hands trembling, memories flooding back like a tide. Everything made sense now. Fate had crossed their paths twice, always for the same reason: to protect the same child. Later that day, Richard found her holding the photo. His expression was a mixture of shock and emotion. "You were there from the beginning?" he asked, his voice breaking. Angela nodded, tears shining in her eyes. He stepped closer, his tone soft and full of awe. "Maybe God sent you twice, to teach me what love really is." Time seemed to stand still. The sunlight poured through the windows, bathing them in a warm golden glow. There was something sacred about that moment, a bond not made of blood but of destiny. Angela, once invisible, had become the heartbeat of that home. And the millionaire who had once chased power now understood the true worth of kindness, faith, and presence. Yet life, generous and unpredictable, still had one last lesson to reveal, one that would forever link Angela Brown's name to that house. The discovery of the photograph changed the air in the mansion. It was as if every corner now breathed a new truth, one that had always been there, hidden between memories and coincidences. Richard Hale, the millionaire used to having answers for everything, now found himself speechless. He simply stared at the picture, Angela, younger, smiling, holding a baby in her arms, and saw something that defied logic. Angela Brown remained silent. Words were unnecessary. She didn't want explanations or praise. She only wanted respect for what destiny had woven without asking permission. The photograph was more than an image. It was proof that true love doesn't choose time, color, or social class. It was as if life had written that story twice just to make sure it would be read. Richard stood by the window, deep in thought. For years he had sought meaning and success in business and control, but it had taken a cleaning lady with a noble soul and a boy with a pure smile to show him what truly mattered. She was here all along, from the very beginning, he whispered, as if finally understanding life's divine design. Meanwhile, Ben played in the garden, unaware of the magnitude of the discovery. His laughter echoed between the trees, and Angela watched from the window. In that moment she felt peace. The child she had once held in her arms before fate reunited them was now growing surrounded by love, protected by the very life she had helped save. Richard approached her slowly, still holding the photograph. The silence between them was heavy but full of meaning. "Don't you see?" he said softly. "You were the first touch my son ever felt. The first gaze. The first love." Angela lowered her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Sometimes, God writes love in the places no one bothers to look." That moment bound together what time had once divided. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something deeper, built on faith and purpose. Richard looked at her as though finally seeing what had always been before him, but had never been recognized. The house itself seemed to listen, wrapped in the soft glow of sunlight that slipped through the windows and illuminated what had once been dark. Angela never sought recognition, but it came naturally. Richard began speaking of her in meetings, at charity events, and everyone wanted to meet the woman who had saved his son's life and, unknowingly, healed his heart. But she remained the same, simple, humble, with that quiet light in her eyes that only those who know truth carry. One calm evening, as they watched the sun set in the garden, Richard held the photograph once more. "You know what's funny?" he said. "You were meant to care for him and maybe for me, too." Angela smiled without replying. Sometimes silence says more than words, and in that quiet exchange, they both understood that life had given them a second chance. But their story wasn't over yet. Love born from purpose always finds new ways to blossom, even when everything seems complete. And in that home, now finally at peace, something greater was about to begin. The sun rose over Miami with a gentler light, as if the sky itself wanted to bless this new beginning. The Hale Mansion, once a symbol of power and loneliness, now breathed humanity. Through its halls echoed laughter, light footsteps, and voices filled with life. There walked Angela Brown, the cleaning lady who was once invisible, now moving with the quiet dignity and respect she had always deserved. Richard Hale, the millionaire who had finally learned to feel, no longer saw wealth in walls but in people. He watched Angela with silent admiration, as one might gaze upon a quiet miracle. There was no longer a gap between master and servant, but a bond of shared purpose, a friendship born from pain and nourished by gratitude. The pride that once ruled him now bowed before compassion. Ben's recovery brought even more light into their lives. The boy who once barely smiled now ran through the garden, calling Angela Mom of the Heart. Every small gesture of hers, and a cup of coffee, a bedtime story, a whispered prayer, carried lessons in genuine love. The mansion, once cold and lifeless, had become a real home, where every detail held warmth and meaning. One afternoon, Richard surprised Angela with a proposal. He wanted to create a foundation with her, to help mothers and children in need. "You were the one who taught me what true value means," he said. Angela hesitated, not out of doubt but humility. She had never imagined that her story, marked by pain and loss, could one day inspire so many others. The Hearts That Heal Foundation began modestly, but grew powerful. In no time, hundreds of families were being helped. Angela, ever discreet, preferred to remain behind the scenes, quietly witnessing the good she had set in motion. Her name began to be spoken with respect across Miami, not as the cleaning lady, but as a symbol of faith, strength, and redemption. During the opening ceremony, Richard gave an emotional speech. True wealth isn't what we accumulate, he said, looking at Angela among the crowd. It's what we share. His words struck deep, for they came from a man who once believed love could be replaced by success. Now, the millionaire who once lived surrounded by luxury understood that greatness lives in simplicity. Angela sat in the front row, tears rolling down her cheeks. Not from sorrow, but gratitude. Life had been hard, but it had also been fair, for it had given her a chance to turn pain into purpose. And as she looked at Ben, healthy, smiling, full of joy, she knew she had finally found redemption, not through recognition, but through the peace of having fulfilled her calling. That night, alone by the sea, Angela walked barefoot along the wet sand. The gentle wind brushed her face while the horizon glowed in shades of rose and gold. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and smiled. For the first time in years, she felt whole. It was as if the ocean itself whispered softly, "You have won, not against the world, but within yourself." And so, between the sound of the waves and the light of dawn, ended the journey of a humble woman who transformed the life of a millionaire, saved a child, and proved that grace and forgiveness are the greatest riches a soul can possess. Angela Brown's story isn't just about destiny, it's about quiet courage and unshakable faith. It reminds us that even in the humblest roles there is greatness. The cleaning lady no one noticed transformed the heart of a millionaire, proving that true wealth lies in empathy, forgiveness, and the grace to begin again. And maybe that's the lesson we all need to remember. You don't need to have everything to change the world. You just need purpose and love in what you do. Now, take a moment to reflect. What's stopping you from starting your own transformation today? If this story inspired you, touched your heart, or made you see the power of small actions, this is your sign to keep growing with us. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and come discover more stories like Angela's. Stories that remind us the most powerful change begins within.